We spend a lot of time chasing success. We pursue goals, climb ladders, check boxes. We invest in strategies, tactics, and tools, believing they'll take us to the top. But here's the uncomfortable truth. None of that matters if the mind behind it all is unclear, unaligned, or malnourished. Success doesn't begin in the marketplace. It doesn't begin in your calendar or your bank account. It begins in the mind. The greatest journeys, those that leave a mark, don't start with answers. They start with the courage to ask better questions. And perhaps the most powerful question of all is why? Why do I do what I do? Why do I want to succeed? Why do I get up in the morning and choose this path? Most people don't know. They can tell you what they want, a new title, a six-figure salary, recognition. But when asked why, they stumble, they shrug, they default to vague statements like, I want to be successful, or I want to make a difference. And while those words sound good, they're not grounded, they're not specific, they're not enough to carry you through the storms. When your why is unclear, you chase shadows. You move quickly but without direction. You get busy but not effective. You compare, compete, and copy others, hoping their map will lead to your fulfillment. But the truth is, borrowed goals rarely satisfy. Because achievement without alignment doesn't nourish the soul, it exhausts it. Success is not about what you do, it's about what you believe. The most impactful people in the world, leaders, creators, change makers, don't start with plans. They start with belief. They know their purpose. They've taken the time to nourish their mind with clarity. That's what fuels them. That's what keeps them going when the pressure rises and the applause fades. Think of it like this. Your mind is the soil. If the soil is unhealthy, if it's full of fear, confusion, or self-doubt, then it doesn't matter what kind of seeds you plant, the harvest will be shallow. But if the soil is rich with purpose, intention, and self-awareness, then anything planted in it has the potential to flourish. That's why nourishing your mind is not a luxury. It's not something you do after you've achieved success. It's the first step. It's foundational. And it starts by stepping back and asking, what drives me? Not what impresses others, not what looks good on paper, but what makes me come alive? What cause am I willing to suffer for? What kind of impact do I want to have, and why does that matter? This kind of reflection isn't easy. It forces us to sit in discomfort, to confront our insecurities, to admit that some of the things we've been chasing were never really ours to begin with, but it's necessary. Because once you have clarity of purpose, everything else begins to fall into place. You stop chasing approval. You stop needing constant validation. You stop comparing your chapter 2 to someone else's chapter 20. Why? Because you're no longer trying to outrun the noise. You're anchored in something deeper, something steady, something true. There's power in knowing why you do what you do. When challenges come, and they will, you don't crumble. When the outcome takes longer than expected, and it will, you don't waver. Because you're not driven by ego. You're driven by purpose. And that kind of fuel doesn't burn out. But let's be clear. Clarity doesn't mean certainty. Having a why doesn't mean you'll never face doubt or fear. It just means those doubts won't define you. They won't own you because you've done the work to nourish your mind with something stronger than circumstance, belief. Now, someone might say, that's great, but I need practical results. I can't just live on purpose alone. That's true. But the mistake is thinking it's one or the other, heart or hustle, meaning or metrics. The best kind of success comes from both, but purpose must come first. Because when you start with why, the how and the what become clearer, more focused, more powerful. And when you nourish your mind first, success becomes sustainable. You're no longer climbing a ladder you don't believe in. You're no longer building someone else's dream. You're no longer running on fumes. You're choosing every day to build a life that reflects who you truly are. We see this all the time in leadership. The best leaders aren't necessarily the smartest or most talented. They're the ones who are grounded in purpose. They create cultures of trust because people follow belief, not bravado. They make bold decisions because they're not afraid to stand for something. They don't lead from the top, they lead from the inside out. And it's no different in our own lives. Whether you're an entrepreneur, an artist, a teacher, or a student, your effectiveness is amplified when your mind is nourished with clarity. You think differently, you speak differently, you act with intention, not impulse. You stop reacting and start leading. But none of that can happen until you make a decision to stop looking outward for direction and start looking inward for alignment. To stop asking, what should I do, and start asking, why does this matter to me? That shift, though simple, is powerful. It reorients your entire life around meaning instead of motion. So if you want to succeed, really succeed, in a way that doesn't just look good but feels right, start with your mind. Don't skip that step. Don't outsource it. Nourish it daily. Feed it with purpose. Align it with values. Protect it from noise. And above all, give it the space to ask better questions. Because the answers don't lead to success. The right questions do. And the most important one is the one that started it all. Why? We are all storytellers, every single one of us. But the most powerful stories we tell aren't the ones we share with the world. They're the ones we whisper to ourselves when no one's listening. They shape the way we see our potential, how we interpret failure, and how we define success. These stories don't just influence our decisions, they determine the direction of our lives. Every action we take is rooted in a belief, and those beliefs often come from the narratives we've absorbed over time. Some were handed to us by our parents, our teachers, our peers. Others we wrote ourselves, usually in moments of pain or uncertainty. I'm not good enough. I always mess things up. People like me don't succeed. These are not truths, they are stories. And if we don't examine them, we live inside them. We build our lives around them, and then wonder why we feel stuck. But here's the good news. If your mind is the author of those stories, then you can rewrite them. You can choose a new narrative. One that nourishes possibility instead of fear. One that calls you forward instead of holding you back. This isn't just about positive thinking. It's about self-awareness. It's about recognizing that your thoughts aren't facts. They're habits. And like any habit, they can be changed. But you can't change what you won't confront. And most people never confront their own inner narrative. They live reactively, unaware that the real obstacle isn't out there, it's the voice inside. Think about it. How many times have you talked yourself out of a risk, a conversation, an opportunity, not because you weren't capable, but because your inner story told you you weren't ready? How many times have you settled for less, not because it was all that was available, but because you believed it was all you deserved? We don't rise to the level of our ambition, we rise to the level of our self-belief. And that belief is constructed from the stories we repeat over and over until they harden into identity. But identity is not fixed, it's fluid. And when we become conscious of the stories guiding us, we can begin to reshape them with intention. This doesn't mean pretending everything is okay. It doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means telling the truth, not just about your circumstances, but about your strength. It means acknowledging the setbacks without letting them define you. It means shifting from I failed to I learned, from I'm not good at this to I'm growing. From I can't to I haven't yet. It's subtle, but it's everything. The most resilient people you'll ever meet aren't immune to fear. They've just trained themselves to interpret life differently. They don't see challenges as signs to stop. They see them as invitations to become. That's not because they're braver, it's because their inner story is built on growth, not limitation. You see this in the way they respond to failure, where one person might see a closed door, they see a redirection. Where someone else might internalize a loss as proof they're not enough. They see it as a necessary chapter in becoming more. That mindset isn't accidental, it's cultivated, it's practiced. And it begins with a choice to be intentional about what story you're telling. There's something powerful about realizing that your mind is always listening. The words you speak to yourself are shaping the neural pathways of your brain. Every time you repeat a belief, whether empowering or destructive, you're reinforcing a mental pattern that becomes easier to follow next time. That's how stories become self-fulfilling prophecies. You act in alignment with the narrative you believe. So if you tell yourself you're a procrastinator, you'll act like one. If you tell yourself you're unlucky, you'll look for evidence that supports that belief. But if you begin telling yourself that you're capable of showing up, of learning, of growing, then you begin to build a different kind of life, one grounded in possibility rather than fear. This is why nourishing your mind is not just about input, it's about interpretation. It's not just about what you consume, but how you frame it. Two people can face the same situation and walk away with completely different meanings. One walks away discouraged, the other walks away determined. The difference isn't the event, it's the story. If we want to build a life of impact and fulfillment, we must start at the root, the narrative we carry. And that narrative must be consciously shaped, not unconsciously inherited. That means questioning the labels, challenging the assumptions, choosing words that expand rather than shrink our vision of what's possible. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "I always mess this up," pause. Ask, is that true? Or is it a story I've been repeating without thinking? The next time you're tempted to say, "I'm not good at this," ask, what would change if I said, "I'm learning this instead"? These small shifts compound. Over time, they form a new internal compass, one that leads you toward growth rather than away from it. And the most meaningful success doesn't come from hustle alone. It comes from alignment, from believing something true and good about who you are and what you're capable of, and then acting in a way that reflects that belief. That's the essence of integrity. That's the foundation of confidence. And it's built not on bravado, but on the quiet courage to rewrite your story one line at a time. Because the future isn't written yet. It's being written now with every thought, every belief, every sentence you say to yourself. So choose your story wisely. Feed your mind with something worthy of the life you're building. Make your inner dialogue your greatest ally. Because in the end, the story you live by becomes the life you live out. We often talk about success as if it happens in isolation, as if it's just about what's inside us, a drive, our mindset, our discipline. But there's another factor at play, one that we rarely pay enough attention to: our environment, the space we live in, the voices we hear, the people we surround ourselves with. All of it is shaping us every single day, whether we realize it or not. Your mind is always absorbing, like the body takes in nutrients from food, the mind takes in energy, ideas, and emotions from its surroundings. What you feed your mind is just as important as what you feed your body. But while most of us are careful about what we eat, we're far less intentional about what we consume mentally and who we allow to sit at our table. Environment is more than a place, it's a culture. It's the habits, expectations, conversations, and energy that fill the space around you. And those things either lift you up or pull you down. They either reinforce your growth or sabotage it. They either remind you of your purpose or distract you from it. If you surround yourself with people who complain all day, negativity becomes normal. If you spend time in spaces where everything is urgent and reactive, your nervous system starts believing that peace is dangerous. If the voices you hear, online or in real life, are constantly telling you you're behind, not enough, or missing out, eventually you'll start acting from fear instead of purpose. But the opposite is also true. If your environment is full of people who challenge you with love, who believe in your potential, who hold you accountable not just to performance but to character, then your mind starts operating from a different foundation. You stop striving for approval and start leaning into alignment. You stop reacting and start creating. We are not as independent as we think. Humans are deeply social creatures. We mirror what we're exposed to. It's not weakness, it's biology. And if we know that, we can use it, and we can shape our environment with intention instead of letting it shape us by default. The problem is many of us stay in environments we've outgrown because we're afraid of what change will cost. We stay in friendships that drain us because of history. We stay in routines that dull our thinking because they're familiar. We tolerate noise, clutter, chaos, externally and mentally, because it feels easier than disrupting the pattern. But here's the cost of staying stuck. Potential withers. Dreams shrink. Purpose gets drowned out by noise. And over time, we begin to believe that the smallness of our environment is the limit of what's possible for us. Changing your environment doesn't always mean moving cities or quitting your job. Sometimes it means rethinking who you text when you're confused, who you let influence your thinking, what you allow into your ears and eyes the moment you wake up. Sometimes it means curating silence so you can hear your own voice again, because the truth is clarity doesn't shout. It whispers. And if your environment is too loud, you'll miss it. You'll confuse noise for progress, activity for impact, feedback for truth. One of the most powerful things you can do for your growth is to surround yourself with people who are aligned with the values you want to live by. Not people who are perfect, not people who agree with you on everything, but people who challenge you to be more honest, more courageous, more fully yourself. A great environment doesn't flatter your ego, it feeds your character. It reminds you of what matters. It helps you stay anchored when the world tries to pull you in 100 directions. It supports you in ways you didn't even know you needed until you experienced it. And this isn't just about people, it's also about habits, systems, the space you live in, the books on your shelf, the way your phone is set up, the way you start your morning. Every small thing is a signal. Every signal sends a message to your brain about what's important, what's urgent, and what's possible. So ask yourself, what kind of environment does the best version of me need in order to thrive? What kind of space would support my creativity, my discipline, my peace? What kind of relationships would fuel my courage instead of my anxiety? What kind of mental inputs, content, conversations, influences would nourish me instead of distract me? These are not small questions. They are the foundation of how your mind is formed, because no matter how motivated or smart you are, your environment will either reinforce the best in you or pull you back into old stories. If you want lasting success, you must build a world around you that is congruent with where you're going, not just where you've been. And sometimes this means letting go. Letting go of what's comfortable but misaligned. Letting go of relationships that depend on your silence. Letting go of noise that masquerades as inspiration but really just feeds your insecurity. It's not easy. It's rarely convenient. But it's necessary if you want to grow with intention. The best athletes, thinkers, leaders, they don't just train harder. They build environments that make focus inevitable, that make discipline natural, that make growth the path of least resistance. Not because they're better than anyone else, but because they understand the simple truth. Your mind becomes what it's most exposed to. So choose carefully. Protect your space like your future depends on it, because it does. Curate your circle. Edit your inputs. Design your routines. Create a rhythm in your life that supports not just achievement, but alignment. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. And your environment is the system that holds it all together. If you want to nourish your mind, don't just change your thoughts. Change what surrounds your thoughts. Change the soil. Because no matter how powerful the seed, it cannot grow in toxic ground. Your environment is not neutral. It's either feeding your growth or feeding your fear. It's either expanding your vision or narrowing it. So take responsibility for it. Take inventory of it and make the brave decision to create a space internally and externally that aligns with the kind of life you're here to build. Most people think of freedom as doing whatever you want, waking up late, skipping structure, following every impulse. They see discipline as the opposite of freedom, rigid, restrictive, maybe even a little oppressive. But real freedom doesn't come from escape. It comes from mastery. It's not about doing whatever you feel like. It's about doing what truly matters, even when you don't feel like it. And that takes discipline, not as punishment, but as power. We live in a world of instant gratification. Everything is available on demand. We can swipe for entertainment, tap for food, scroll for dopamine. And while technology has brought convenience, it's also trained our brains to avoid discomfort. We want results without resistance, progress without patience, growth without grit. But life doesn't work like that. Not if you want anything that lasts. Mental discipline is the ability to choose long-term alignment over short-term relief. It's the muscle that allows you to act on your values instead of your mood. And like any muscle, it's built through repetition, through small, quiet, daily choices that no one sees but that shape everything. When we think about success, we often focus on goals. But goals are just destinations. Discipline is the vehicle that gets us there. Without it, intentions remain wishes. Plans stay on paper. Dreams stay in our heads. Discipline bridges the gap between what you want and who you're willing to become to get there. And yet we resist it. Why? Because discipline demands discomfort. It requires us to say no when we want to say yes. It forces us to confront our own excuses. It holds up a mirror and says, are you serious about this or are you just interested? Truth is, we all crave freedom. But we often chase the version that feels good now and costs us later. We sleep in instead of showing up. We procrastinate instead of preparing. We scroll instead of studying. And slowly, without noticing, we give away our freedom piece by piece to our impulses. We let our habits become cages, but mental discipline reverses that process. It reclaims your freedom by making you the author of your actions, not a slave to your urges. It says, I don't need to feel ready. I choose to show up anyway. That mindset, that ability to act in service of what you care about rather than what feels easy, is one of the most powerful things you can cultivate. It's not about being harsh with yourself. It's not about perfection or punishment. True discipline is rooted in love. Love for your future self, love for your potential, love for the people depending on you to bring your best to the table. When you love something deeply, you protect it with discipline. You don't let distraction steal from it. You don't let convenience weaken it. And this matters not just in big moments, but in the everyday. The way you do small things becomes the way you do everything. How you show up to the things that don't matter shapes your capacity for the things that do. Discipline is forged in ordinary moments. When you follow through on your promises, when you hold the boundary, when you keep going even when motivation fades. That's another key truth. Discipline outlasts motivation. Motivation is a spark. Discipline is the firewood. You can't rely on being inspired every day. Some days you won't feel like it. You'll be tired, discouraged, distracted. But discipline doesn't ask how you feel. It asks what matters most, and then it leads you there. Mental discipline is not about control for control's sake. It's about alignment. It's about making sure your actions are consistent with your values, your purpose, your why. Without that consistency, you'll be pulled in 100 directions. You'll say yes to too many things. You'll live reactively instead of intentionally, and eventually you'll lose the sense of agency that creates real confidence. People often talk about confidence as something you either have or don't, but confidence is not a trait. It's a result. It's what you build when you keep your word to yourself, when you do what you said you'd do, especially when it's hard. Every time you follow through, your brain learns, I can trust myself. That trust is the foundation of unshakable confidence. And it's earned through discipline. One of the greatest forms of mental freedom is peace. Not the kind that comes from quiet rooms and spa days, but the kind that comes from knowing you're in integrity with your values, that you're not hiding from yourself, that you're not making excuses, that you're doing the work even when it's hard. That kind of peace is priceless. And it only comes when your mind knows you're leading it, not the other way around. But let's be clear, discipline isn't about always doing more. Sometimes discipline means resting when your body needs it, saying no when your calendar is full, stepping back to reflect instead of pushing through mindlessly. Discipline is not rigidity, it's clarity. And clarity gives you the freedom to act on what matters instead of reacting to everything that doesn't. We've been taught that freedom is the absence of structure. But in truth, freedom thrives within structure. Just like